So in this webinar, we will be looking at the following. So we will quickly spend some time thinking about why it is important for resources to be accessible and inclusive, and how this can be achieved through the UDL, Universal Design for Learning Principles. And then we will get right into the materials. Lauren will take you through the first of those, being Word and PowerPoint and Bula lessons pages. And then I will take you through videos and images. If at any stage you have any question, feel free just to interrupt us. Or if you don't want to do that, you can put it into the chat box. And Lauren and myself will either break or pause and answer that, or we will type a response to you. And if we don't have time, we will reply to you via email. Okay, next slide, Lauren. Okay, so the first question that we want you to think about is, why is it important to create inclusive and accessible educational resources in your discipline? Please unmute your mics or use the chat box to give some responses.
So I think the reason why it's important to have or to create inclusive and accessible resources is because you have people that come from diverse backgrounds and come with different abilities, like physically able or differently able. So it's important to make that information accessible to everyone. But I think specifically in my discipline, which is education, once you step into the classroom, you will find similar contexts where the learners that come into your class come from also diverse backgrounds and are differently abled as well. So yeah, that's why I think it's important.
Thanks, Abdullah. You nailed it. And Jay has also just, said the same thing, to address the diversity of learners in the classroom. And in South Africa, we know that there is a wide range of diverse learners, and that's important to note. Anyone else with maybe something slightly different to the diversity aspect?
Vidar, can I just quickly add one more point? The diversity based upon the previous person who shared, and also the diversity is at different levels. The diversity is not only from the backgrounds, the diversity in terms of the educational backgrounds, in terms of the context, the culture. So it's quite broad. And that is why we want to make it an inclusive space, as we already spoke about. It's not just about, catering the needs of only a certain group of learners. Let me put it that way.
Thanks, Jay. That's very important. So it goes beyond background, beyond age and culture, education background or schooling background. And from Nikki, we have to maximize and encourage engagement and therefore learning. Yes, exactly that, Nikki. Do you want to elaborate on that, Nikki, some more?
Well, I just think, especially now that we find ourselves in this sort of online space, engagement's been something that we're all struggling with. And I think UDL is a great way, at least in this space, to try and enhance engagement among students, keeping in mind the complexity of diversity. And also, I think, in the blended space, in enhancing engagement is also a good thing, to have all students feel like they can participate in what's being presented and taught.
Exactly. Thanks, Nikki. And I'm so glad that you mentioned, like, in the online space in current times, because online making items or resources accessibly in the online context may be a little bit different to how we do so in a face-to-face context. I think there's a certain level of it being more challenging for some people. Oloranto, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, says equalizing the playing field. Yes. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm coming from the philosophy department, and
Right.
yeah, so I think that like the material in and of itself can be very, I guess the nature of the work that we do in philosophy can be very exclusionary, very inaccessible, very ivory tower kind of work. And obviously, because we're dealing with material that's quite predated as well, it might be difficult for students to kind of read the material kind of firsthand. So it's quite important to make sure that we provide a way for all students to kind of enter at an equal footing by making the work more accessible, at least for varying degrees of familiarity with the discipline as well. Yeah, it's just to make sure that it kind of caters to varying levels of entry that students might have in order to make sure that they're at an equal footing in how they engage with the material.
Excellent point, Oloranto. And you know that it's very important that we create those opportunities. And this just makes me think of Bourdieu's concept, you know, cultural capital and habitus. We need to provide opportunities so that all can participate. So thanks for that point. Thank you so much, everyone, for your participation. It's really made me think about, you know, the importance of creating inclusive and accessible educational resources. Let's move to the next slide, Lauren. Okay, so accessibility, so what is it? So simply put, it is a practice of making content as usable to as many people as possible. You can go to the next slide, Lauren. Okay, so how is this possible? So at UCT or at SILT, we use a particular framework, UDL, the Universal Design for Learning. And this principle has three key, this framework rather has three key principles. And in no particular order, the first is to provide multiple means of engagement. So this is really or broadly about finding ways to make content relevant to students, inspiring and motivating and interesting. And then the second principle, to provide multiple means for content to be represented. So this principle really speaks to making content available in different formats or different mediums, as well as contextualizing it for the students. And then the third principle, to provide multiple means for students to take action and to express themselves. So this principle speaks to the idea of creating opportunities for students for their voices to be heard, providing them space to share their prior knowledge, their views on different content, on different levels of content or in the course. Okay, next slide, Lauren. Okay, so over to you, Lauren.
Okay, great. Thank you, Widad. So what I want to just highlight is that universal design for learning can be applied to both the actual content that you're teaching in your course, as well as the materials you use to teach it. And this, what we're going to go through in the next few slides, is the materials that you use to teach the content, and how to make those materials as accessible as possible. But UDL, ideally, UDL is applied to the entire design of your course, so, and from the outset. So when you design the course, think about these three principles that we had up. So think about providing multiple means for students to engage with the content, providing multiple means to present the content, and also multiple means to take action and expression. Yeah, so we're not going to go into detail about how to do that with the content, but we will go into detail about the materials you use to teach. So to quickly talk about text. This can be text in either printed or digital format, and in any program, so Word or PowerPoint or PDF or whichever program you use to put the text into. And this is a list of guidelines to follow to make that text accessible. Use familiar fonts. In the past, we used to say to use sans serif, so no funny things with the font, little, I can't remember what it's called, like decorative parts to the font, but it doesn't matter as much, according to recent research, but still use familiar fonts. Don't use excessively funny fonts. 12-point or larger, 10-point and smaller is not accessible. And then use the built-in headings and styles in that program, and use column headings in tables. Use alternative text for visuals and tables. Widad will go into a bit more detail about alternative text. Use meaningful hyperlinks, so don't just paste the URL, but make the hyperlink text meaningful. And then also use a sufficient contrast for text and background colors. And most programs like Word or PowerPoint have built-in accessibility checkers. And when you select for that accessibility checker to fix your document, it will go through it and flag anything that's inaccessible. I want to quickly ask you to just by a show of hands or respond in the chat if you have used an accessibility checker before in Word or PowerPoint. It doesn't matter where. I just want to know what the level of usage is in the room of people using accessibility checkers. You can say yes or no in the chat, or a hand. Okay, so I see some hands up. Okay, haven't yet. Okay. Okay, good. Thank you so much, everyone. I think this will then be useful to you if you haven't used it before. For those who have used it, if you have any extra details that you see we didn't cover, please jump in and share it. Okay. Okay, let me put this bit chat away. Okay. Now, to quickly go over Word and PowerPoint. So remember the list of accessibility, the text-based accessibility checklist is sort of a baseline that applies to both Word and PowerPoint PDF. Word and PowerPoint are the most used ones. So I'm going to focus on these two first, and then I'm going to talk about making your visualization stages accessible as well. So for both Word and PowerPoint, the accessibility checker is in the Preview tab in the top of your ribbon, and you can find the Check Accessibility button there for both. The first example is Word, and the second one is from PowerPoint. Right, so when you click that, the Check Accessibility button, you can select then to check accessibility. Then you get, this is the example from Word. It gives you a list of errors or warnings that you can pay attention to fixing. It also gives you the recommended action. So you can then click on either add a description there or mark as decorative. This is the example that I'm using. It's an image without alt text. So you can then go ahead and mark it as decorative. In this case, it's the UCT logo. And what I will do there, for example, is to click on add a description, and I will add in the University of Cape Town logo. And then a good tip is to check this box below the results box that says keep accessibility checker running while I work. And this activates a little notification button at the bottom of your Word document or PowerPoint, and it gives you little warnings when it picks something up that's not accessible. Then you don't have to check the accessibility or run the accessibility checker every time. This is an example from PowerPoint after I ran the accessibility checker, and there are a lot more things that I need to fix to make this PowerPoint accessible. Lots of alternative text to add. A best practice for PowerPoint is to always have slide titles. So this is picking up that some slides don't have titles, for example. And also in PowerPoint, keep the accessibility checker running while you work. You can check that box to let it keep picking things up as you work. So for PowerPoint, when you expand the list of errors, in this case missing alternative text, it will give you a list of the things that don't have alt text, and then you can click on any of these and it will take you to the slide that it's on, and it will highlight the item that's not accessible, and then you can go ahead and either mark it as decorative or you can add a description to that item. Okay, any questions so far before we continue on to Villa Lessons pages? You're welcome to put it in the chat or unmute and ask. Right, okay, I'll continue. So Villa Lessons pages, here we decided to focus on three things oh, great, thank you, Imra. We decided to focus on three things specifically for Villa Lessons pages to make it more accessible. And the first is to use the rich text editor. I'm going to jump to the next slide, and then I will come back to this one. I just want to bring up a screenshot of the rich text editor, and you will find this in most of the text boxes where you can add items, where you can add content to Villa Lessons pages. If you haven't used Lessons pages before, we have a Lessons webinar next week Thursday, so please come to that one. I'm sure you'll get details of it on the SILT website and the webinars and the events and webinars. So the Lessons pages allows you to add content, and when you add content, you can add text, and the text boxes have this rich text editor, and use the built-in style that Villa has in terms of formatting. So here you can apply different heading styles, or you can have normal text. You can make text bold, italicize it, underline it, strike through, and there are also numbered lists that you can apply, or bulleted lists that you can apply here. So using the built-in formatting is always the best practice when it comes to text documents. Okay, then another point for Lessons pages is to use instructions and instructional text. So this isn't so much about the formatting, but more about helping students digest the material that you have added. So when you add something to your Villa Lessons page, and don't just put a link there or embed a PDF or something, add instructions to go with it and be clear and detailed about what you want students to do with it or take from it, so that they know, rather than assume or have to guess or have to ask you what to do with it. And this is even more important in online context, because there isn't that quick interaction in a face-to-face class where students can quickly ask you something. We don't have, it's not, it's because it's a different space. You have to make all of these things explicit and upfront, and try to imagine what students might want to know about this resource or material that you've added to the lesson page. And instructional text is a learning design term that we use, and we stress it. It's the text that goes between materials or resources added to the lesson page, or activities. So you have now added a link to a reading, and you've told them what the reading is about, and then you put in a link to a discussion forum, for example. So the instructional text will go between the reading and the link to the forum to help students transition from reading the resource into now having to participate in the forum. It will give them the purpose of the forum, what they need to do, why it's important, and just link those two things for them, so that it forms a more of a seamless pathway on the lesson page. And then the last thing about how you can make lesson pages more accessible is to use a consistent weekly or daily, however often you present, pattern. And this is something that can happen every single in the lesson page for every day or every week. And it provides consistency and structure, so to create familiarity and help students to easily navigate your course site. And this in turn helps to reduce anxiety. And an example of a pattern that could be duplicated every week or every day or per module, however, whatever the pattern of your course is to list the learning outcomes and then display the key information such as dates or estimated learner time and a checklist. This is a very simple pattern. You can have a pattern that suits your discipline or your personality, your content. This is just an example. I want to show you what it looks like on a Villa Lessons page. Okay, so this is the example that I spoke about. It's the learning outcomes, the key information, and a checklist of items that students have to work through. And you can add this for each of the lessons pages that you have on your course site. And we've made an easy way to do that by providing templates that you can insert in the lessons pages. And you can find these templates also in the rich text editor when you add text to your lessons page, and then you click that button called templates. And then you will get a little menu box with all of the templates added. For example, the lecturer conversation, which is the speech bubble and the little photo, and then learning outcomes and key information. So this is a ready-made item that's added to your lesson page, and then you can edit it according to your details, according to your learning outcomes or your key information for your course. Okay, so that is it for the Villa lessons pages as well. Please, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask if you want to see something again, or you can ask it in the chat. Otherwise, we'll continue on, hand it over to Vidad.
Thanks, Lauren. So we'll just ask again if there's any questions or comments before we move on. Okay, it doesn't seem. Oh, yes, please go ahead.
No, I'm just curious, you know, when you put up the display for, it's so rigid, it's so uncreative, you know, for the consistency. Is there a way to make it a bit more vibey, if you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, there is certainly a way to do so, Jill.
So yes. If you, I mean, how can you make that more exciting for the students?
There's there is in the rich text editor, there is colors that you can play around with.
Okay.
Yes, and there's also something called CSS that once you add it to your pages will automatically follow a particular style or theme. I think if there is time at the end, Lauren and I can show you how that works. Or there's also the advanced Vula lessons pages webinar, which might just detail more information on how to use CSS if you want kind of thematized or stylized Vula pages.
And the rich text editor allows you to add images as well. But yeah, like with that, you can play around with the color, the font constraints as well. And yeah, so there are ways to make it a bit more interesting looking. Yeah, you don't have to stick to something that's just rigid or unappealing, if that makes sense. Cool.
Great, thanks, Jill, for your question.
There we go.
All right, so let's move on to videos. So the role of videos in learning and teaching is that it provides opportunities for students to engage with the content through pausing, rewinding, playing at a preferred pace, like either slow or fast, that they are comfortable with. And of course, replaying it so that they can capture and note all that has been shown or discussed. So videos are also multimodal and can be personal as it makes use of sound or voice, body gestures, facial expressions, and images, which all help to make that content come alive. So you can go to the next slide, Lauren. So let's start off with some pointers on how to make videos accessible. So the first is to keep videos short, about 10 to 12 minutes. And if you have like a 45-minute lecture, I suggest that you break it up into 3 parts, like 15 minutes each. This way, students will stay focused. Another pointer is to introduce what you'll be covering in the video, like what we did in this session where we said what we will cover. And this really helps students to follow along, to know what is expected, and it draws out what is relevant to them, and it can at times be a very motivating factor for them to keep watching or keep doing the course. And this also speaks to the UDL principle of creating multiple means of engagement. Another good idea is to script your videos before you record them. You don't have to script them like word per word, but just key points that you want to make. And this will help you to stay focused on what to say so that you don't end up rambling about, and it will also save you time in terms of editing or re-recording. You can also think of using a conversational tone, as this will help you to build a relationship with your students and makes you come across as approachable. And then attribution and links. If you are using videos from external sources such as Facebook, TikTok, or YouTube, please make sure that you link to those sources or you attribute, because if students want to find out more about that video or that author who made that video, they might have various other videos on that. They can easily just use that link to do further exploration on that. Okay, next slide, Lauren. So images in a video. So if you are using images in a video, which can be in the form of graphs, diagrams, photographs, cartoons, and infographics, you need to describe it to some detail. some students may have visual impairments and won't be able to see the diagram. So a description of it is needed, but this description will also benefit others in the class. So just in terms of how much detail to describe, not every image needs to be described in full depth. So here you really need to think about what detail is needed to bring out or across the key learning in that particular image. If you have images, if you are using images just for the simple sake of it being decorative or for aesthetics reasons, then you don't need to elaborate much on that. Just an example. Okay, next slide, Lauren. So let's talk about video formats and sizes. So once your video is made, you can think of making it available in different formats and sizes in your course. So to make videos available in different formats means having perhaps a transcript text version of your video or a PowerPoint slide if it was a narrated PowerPoint, which helps students learn or study, because not everyone can study from a video. They might need a text document to do that, or to highlight, or something tangible that they can maybe print out and file and make notes on. And then making videos available in different sizes makes it possible for students with limited data packages or simply want to save data able to download and watch smaller versions of the video. So please be mindful of that. And then you may also want to embed and connect videos with the rest of your teaching content on Vula, rather than having them in the resource folder or the video lecture tool. Because if these videos aren't labeled correctly, it can be very challenging for students to go into that resource folder or the lecture video tool to go and find it, and then to think, okay, should I watch this for week 1? And what about week 2? How does this fit? So we encourage you to embed those videos with those links into the actual video lessons page, where students can watch it and follow somewhat of a linear pattern in how that videos are watched or engaged with. Next slide, Lauren. So just some types of videos that you might have in your course. So these are just some ideas. You're welcome to share with me if you have more. So course overview video. So this type of video should explain what your course is about, what topics students will learn, the learning outcomes and activities, and mostly, well, what is very important, how the course has been structured on Vula and how to navigate it. So here you can think of using screencast, and you can just take them through your Vula site showing, okay, I've set up all the tasks in this particular Vula page, or it will follow this order, just for them to know where to find the content and how to navigate it, because every Vula site is unique to some extent. And then introductory videos. So these can be used for each section or topic or week, which helps to set the atmosphere of what is to be learned. They don't have to be 12 minutes long. It can be really, really short, like 1 minute. And the academics that I've worked with in the emergency care program, they had such lovely stories to share about different topics in the medical area. And I said, when you introduce that week, maybe it's about handover, about triage, speak about your personal stories or what you've learned from it, just to create that personal or that connection to your students. And the students love those stories. And then core content videos. So core content videos are normally like your lectures, but they can also include interview styled ones. If you're thinking of guest presenters, you can set it up, make it very interesting, use different people in your course, or it can be demonstrations. And then a summary section video. So after a section, or even after a number of readings and activities given, you might think of using a video just to consolidate all of that, and where you can really explain and extract the key learnings from that readings that you may have given students to do. So that's just some ideas of videos that you can use in your course. If you have more ideas of the types, feel free to let me know. I'm very excited on exploring this some more. But for the sake of time, let's move to images. So making learning accessible and inclusive through the use of images. You can go to the next slide, Laden. Thank you. So this doesn't so searching for open education resources, OER, doesn't really it does fit in with making teaching and learning accessible using images, but it also speaks to another topic. But let me just speak to this slide, and this slide is really about how to find OER resources. So we use Pixabay quite a bit because it is a public domain image website where you can find images that are freely licensed, CC BY or public domain. Or you can simply use Google search or Flickr, and you can go to that tab and put on the filter just to ensure that you don't breach any copyright restrictions, which helps to encourage teaching and learning that is open and free. So here you can see that it doesn't really speak to making learning inclusive, but it allows new ways of doing it. It rather speaks to the practice of finding information. So I just put that slide up. Next slide, Lauren. So images. So if you are looking for images of people engaged in some form of activities like discussion or talking and so forth, be mindful that those images, they need to be representative of different racial populations. And this is important to address stereotypes and coloniality teaching practices. And students also need to connect or relate to those images shown. So do try to get South African images rather than images from the global north, where possible and where applicable in your specific discipline. Next slide, Lauren. Another point when using images is to know what is trending amongst your students. So remember, students may come from completely different time periods or generations to yours. For instance, I don't get the Star Wars cartoons always. So I would strongly suggest that you find out what is trending amongst your students, and also to be culturally aware that you don't offend any of your students. And this will also ensure that you are using images in an inclusive manner. Then the last 2 slides, Lauren, on images. So just some ideas on how or where to use images to teach and enhance course content. So 1, images can be used to visualize abstract concepts or to give examples of it, as you can see. And then secondly, to summarize content. I know that I saw some very cute mind maps and lecturers getting creative with putting things in an infographic representation. And this just helps students to connect different concepts and terms into one picture, seeing the whole overall picture. That's very helpful. And then to use humor to create a certain learning atmosphere in the course. Just a question for the audience. Do you have any examples of where images can be used in your course to create inclusive learning and teaching and building community? Okay, we'll maybe come back to that. So let me just finish off the last slide. You can go to the last slide, Lauren. Okay, the last slide. So make it a general rule to use captions and alt text, ALT text, to describe the images, not just to benefit students with visual impairments, but for students to see or understand what you are seeing in a specific image where there might be multiple interpretations. As we all know that an image can say 1,000 words. So just to that level of interpretation, if it's not to be used in a way to say, okay, let's interpret this. If there's one interpretation, it's best just to point that out and to caption it. And this also helps to minimize confusion. So when describing images, also think about what detail would be necessary, as I spoke about prior. So some graphs or diagrams may need more description in comparison to an image of a lecturer. Yep. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to take any questions or comments if you have.
Ida.
Hi, Jay. Yes.
I got a question. I asked this with so many people. I'm still trying to find an answer for that. You know, in my discipline of teaching immunology, the one challenge I'm faced with is the copyrighted images. I use published journal articles, high impact factor journal articles, to kind of, you know, elaborate on a concept or everything. For me, it's right now, when even the thought of me creating those images right from scratch is really overwhelming. So is there any way we can really overcome that? Because these are complex diagrams I'm talking about, pathways, and this links to that, and it cells and all those kind of things, you know? I mean, I don't have any experience with creating images. So what would be your suggestion to overcome challenges like that? Thank you.
Thank you, Jay, for your very important question. I just wish we had Thomas. Yeah, Thomas is our copyright person. But to answer or to try attempt to answer your question, Jay, if you can maybe make contact with that author or with that publisher to ask if you can use that information, those copyright protected images or whatever be the case, then that would be a winner. But if you can't, you can maybe, I just see Cheryl posted something. Okay, sorry, not related. So if you can't, you'd have to maybe make contact with Thomas and ask him for advice on that, because he has said that if it is a UCT course, there is a degree of copyright materials that you can use because it will fall under, it's for education purposes. So he will have more information to answer you better on that, Jay.
We don't.
Yes.
It's Jill. Just how much text to an image? You showed some examples, but how much explanation? I mean, can you give a kind of how should one best give text to an image or an explanation to an image?
Excellent question, Jill. So it just depends on the discipline and how that image is also used, and what information or detail you want to extract out of it for the learning. So we have something, there is a software called Ali, and it's accessibility checker, and it will tell you, you know, this image, it will say, this is a model, and there's certain words used in that model, but it's not captured in your description. So that is actually a way to check, you know, how you can describe it, what words you need to use or what words you haven't used, and then to just think about it and say, okay, this is what I want to extract from it. So I don't know if you've read in detail the image or the slide I had with regards to describe images. So it showed a model, training, adoption, consulting, education services. And when I put it through the Ali checker, it actually picked up that that description didn't make any reference to words in that model. So as a lecturer, I need to say, okay, is it important, those words? Or is it just to say, you know, this is an image of ... So that's actually left up to you.
Okay,
sorry,
thank you. Yeah, thank you. I mean, it is quite a thought process, but I think I love the accessibility check. I've never used it before, so I think that's going to be a major change to presenting. Thank you.
You're welcome. I know that we had a bit of a debate when we asked lecturers to begin to describe, you know, like if they put up a profile picture of them, is it enough just to say lecturer? You know, there are subjects that, you know, teach to gender. Then is it necessary to describe the lecturer's gender and their race and so forth? So there are those kinds of conversations that I also don't have a fixed answer for, but just to make sure that, you know, think about your discipline, think about the topic and the key learnings that's needed, and then you detail or describe accordingly. But thanks, Jill. Any other questions or concerns that we can attempt to answer or get back to you on?
It doesn't look like it, we don't.
Okay.
but we can also let you know now that SILT has a team of EdTech advisors who will be able to help you with any of these accessibility checkers and implementing any fixes as necessary. And you can contact, what's the contact email we did? Is it Tula's?
Oh yes, tula.vilakati@uct.ac.za. I will pop that in if Lauren doesn't get to it first. Just to answer Jay's question, does SILT offer image creation workshops? It will in the future. So look out for that, Jay. Not at the moment, but in the near future.
Thanks, Vidad.
Right.
You're welcome, Jay.
Thank you, Vidad. So if you have any content that you need to make accessible, you can contact Tula, who is the sort of the manager of the EdTech advisors, and you can let Tula know what it is that you would like to have made accessible, and Tula can help you out with by putting you in contact with the EdTech advisors. Yeah, that's it from our side. I really hope this was useful. I'm glad to hear, Jill, that you will be using the accessibility checker. And if you have any questions as you start working on the accessibility of your courses and you come across something that you don't know how to do or you have forgotten, please send us an email as well to let us know. I'm going to put mine in the chat. Vidad, will you put yours in as well?
Sure, no problem. Thank you
right.
again. And just a quick reminder from Max, there are 3 questions that you'd like your feedback on, the SILT survey. So if you can maybe just make a moment for that, we will appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cheryl. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. It's a lovely session, and we hope you have a good day further.